American public transit agencies often don't see quite the same ridership that agencies in other parts of the world do. A lot of this comes down to the insanely car dependent environment that we have been building ourselves into since the middle of the 20th century. However, some cities in the US actually do have fairly expansive rail transit networks that just don't seem to get quite the ridership that they should. Some people might blame the modal choice for this, seeing systems like light rail or streetcars as too slow. And while there are definitely issues with speed and direct routes, especially within North American rail systems, one problem that often goes overlooked when it comes to dealing with ridership struggles is last mile transportation to and from the stations. But what is last mile transportation? And what do a lot of American agencies seem to get wrong with it? American rapid transit networks, whether they're BRT, light rail, heavy rail metros, or commuter systems, generally work to connect surrounding neighborhoods and suburbs with the main downtown of the region. While stations in downtown areas can generate high ridership due to better land use, a higher density of housing and jobs, as well as the increased walkability in the cores of our cities, a vast majority of our transit stops are not in the core of our city. This presents a problem for American transit agencies, as many of these stations in further out neighborhoods fall right into the car-dependent sprawl that you see across much of the US. While it is a very good thing to provide transit to areas that would otherwise be transit deserts, these stations suffer from lower ridership from their main fundamental flaw. These stations are often catered to people arriving by car and are aptly nicknamed park and rides because, you park your car and then you ride the transit. These park and rides are fine for stations on the very end of your system to cater to rural riders where transit may not be feasible to build out to. However, in the more densely populated suburbs, these stations are a massive drain amongst a transit network because they cater to a customer that fundamentally is no longer using transit. Park and rides really popped up around the mid-20th century as a way for people to bypass traffic on their way to their Monday through Friday 9 to 5 job. This kind of rider might have occasionally hopped on the system on Saturdays or Sundays to get to the game or a massive sporting event or visit the city. However, multiple factors, such as the increase of work from home, many jobs shifting away from the 9 to 5 schedule, and offices decentralizing from our downtown cores, much of the demand that these stations were created specifically to deal with has completely fallen off, as well as drivers' refusal to use other modes of transportation. If we want our cities to become more multimodal and less car dependent, we have to work on improving accessibility to these stations. One of the best ways that we can do this is by solving the last mile problem. All stations exist within a reasonable range that people are willing to walk, bike, or bus from the station. These are called the travel shed for these stations, and the more destinations within a 15-minute trip of the station, the better the ridership will be at that station. But how can we possibly make these last mile connections to stations better? We all love them, they're the backbone of our transit networks, but local buses are an excellent tool that we have to improve ridership on our existing rapid transit systems. Because of their more local nature, they can connect riders to destinations that might be outside of the walk shed or bike shed of the station. They're also made to be accessible by anyone, making sure that those who cannot walk or cycle have an easier time getting to their final destination. On top of all of this, you really don't have to modify your existing park and ride stations too much to add bus service. Simply turn some parking spots into bus bays and you'll have a park and ride turned into a transit center in no time. However, agencies need to ensure that these bus connections are frequent, reliable, and scheduled to arrive and depart within the rapid transit network to ensure that they're useful for last mile riders. Microtransit and paratransit also fall alongside buses as they have fairly similar advantages and disadvantages, but either way, it's a fairly affordable way to increase ridership on both buses and your rapid transit. But many of our park and ride stations are still surrounded by suburban sprawl. So what can we even do about that? Bikes have come a long way since their creation back in the 19th century, but they're still an incredibly useful way to get around our cities, offering the flexibility of a car without all of the traffic. However, in the US, we have long neglected to build bike infrastructure to accommodate bikes, such as bike lanes and dedicated multi-use paths. Having a lack of this has led to cycling, especially in areas outside of cities, to only be used for recreation. However, if we want our cities to become more multimodal and less car dependent, bike infrastructure such as protected bike lanes and multi-use paths will be essential last-mile connections for our rapid transit stations. The street infrastructure, though, is only half the battle of getting people to bike to the stations. One thing that will be key in getting people to use micromobility, such as bikes and scooters to get to stations, will be building the bike parking at the station. Many transit agencies in the US have already added some very basic bike parking to stations, such as staple racks. While this is okay, if we really want to see higher ridership to our stations to increase the use of transit, we need to provide people with sheltered, safe parking for their bikes or scooters. One of the most basic ways transit agencies can do this is with bike lockers. These lockers don't take up much space, are quick to install, and can protect bikes in a much better way than staple racks. Larger stations with more space and higher bike and scooter traffic can build full bike garages. These bike parking garages can provide more space for bike storage in a climate-controlled and dry, safe facility. And on top of all of this, transit agencies can even add bike share and scooter share facilities to the existing stations. This would allow for people who don't have their own bikes with them to be able to reach their final destination by bike or scooter without actually having to bring their own scooters or bike. While making last-mile connections to rapid transit by local transit such as buses and micromobility is important, we still have one more way to make last-mile connections to stations a whole lot better. One of the best ways that we can help with last mile transit connections is to make the areas around our rapid transit stations more walkable. Having our stations surrounded by poor land uses such as surface parking is horrible for ridership. Building in these areas around existing park and ride stations would be an incredible way not just to make destinations for our transit riders, but also provide more space for people to live and work in, as well as building more public space for people to enjoy just being in. Building over existing surface parking is known as infill transit-oriented development, and while the US hasn't done a ton of it yet, it is something that many agencies are looking into, as not only does it increase ridership on transit systems, it also contributes positively towards our city's finances, as we aren't spending more money to maintain sprawling car infrastructure, and the more dense mixed-use development provides a much stronger and resilient tax source for cities to help improve and maintain city services. And if you want to hear more about infill transit-oriented development in the US, I actually have an extra section of this video on my Patreon talking about the redevelopment of a mall into a transit-oriented development zone in Phoenix. The old way of building rapid transit stations out in the suburbs for people to park and ride into the city is a concept of the 20th century that just isn't panning out to the same scale in the 21st century. And if we want to continue to have ridership on our existing transit systems, it's imperative that we make sure that the trip from the station to the final destination is as seamless as possible. We have options, from infill at our stations to frequent, reliable local bus services to making micromobility a seamless and safe option. Our rapid transit stations have the ability to adapt and accommodate these changes that will hopefully bring opportunity for others to ride transit and make our cities better places to live. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I especially want to thank all of my patrons, especially Tony Stunts, because without their support this video wouldn't be possible. And if you want benefits like the patrons get, such as early access to videos, extra content, and more, the link is down below, as well as links to my socials where you can get updates and extra content. Folks, thank you so much for watching this video, and as always, I'll see y'all on the next one.